Hey homies. Today's special What If Dean Became Ultimate Angel Hunter. Second episode. So firstly I want to inform you that I do love your feedback. Comment on what changes you want in my videos and what you don't like. Also suggest crossover characters for Dean Winchester. So move into the video. Dean pulled away from the hug and finally looked around. Everywhere he looked there were posters, books, bottles, paper. His gaze shifted to Chuck, who seemed to shrink in on himself. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked. "Dean." Castiel chastised. "Chuck surely is a prophet of the Lord." Dean took a second glance around the room. And yes, the guy did have prophet written all over him. "Ugh. Sorry man," he said to Chuck. And then he noticed just what was featured on most of the posters and books. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a stack of papers. He frowned as he flipped through them. "You're writing about us? You're actually making money off our misery?" "Not really," Chuck replied. "I still write but I'm not being published anymore." "I'm reading about myself." Dean threw the papers back on the table in disgust. "Do you know anything useful? Or are you just focused on Sam and me?" "Just you two." Dean turned away in frustration. That was the problem with prophets. Damned one-trick ponies, the lot of them. Sir Dean." Chuck started. "What?" Dean said, clearly tired and irritated. "Does it hurt?" Chuck asked. At Dean's confused look he waved a hand at Dean and clarified. "Your wings. I mean it looks painful." Dean stiffened at the question and quickly hid his wings, blushing. Sam perked up. "What do they look like?" he asked Dean. "You don't want to know," Dean gruffly replied. "Dean?" Dean vanished and reappeared with a taxidermied falcon. "This'll have to be close enough," Dean muttered as he grabbed a fistful of feathers and pulled. He yanked and tugged at the wings. Once satisfied with the damage he had caused, he waved a hand over the dead bird and splotches of dark red seeped through the feathers, leaving no trace of the original color behind. Sam watched fascinated. "That's wow." When Dean finished with the stuffed bird's makeover he turned it around to inspect his work. His stomach dropped as what he had just done hit him. He began to shake as he stared at the damaged wings, not so dissimilar to his own. He didn't realize just how hard he was gripping the bird, even as Castiel gently pried his hands free from the bird's talons. He stared at the blood slowly collecting in his palms, the same color as his wings. He could only watch as Sam pressed a towel into his hands. He couldn't hear a word anyone spoke. All he could hear was the harsh beating of his heart and the rush of blood in his ears. It was getting hard to breathe. And then there was a warm light. Adoration, respect, annoyance and love. He recognized Castiel's grace as it enveloped him. He desperately latched on with his own grace. Anything to keep him from spiraling completely out of control. He slowly came back to himself and focused on Sam. "Dean? Dean, are you alright? Can you hear me?" Sam was holding Dean's upper arms and searching Dean's eyes. "Why yeah," Dean unsteadily replied. He looked around the room and noticed it was a lot messier than it had been 5 minutes earlier. Bottles and light bulbs were shattered, papers were torn and strewn across the floor, posters were ripped and barely hanging on the walls, and furniture was overturned. Dean looked to see Chuck shifting nervously from foot to foot. Sorry," he apologized. Chuck froze and stared at Dean. "No, it's my fault. I'm so sorry." Chuck's response struck Dean as odd, but prophets always were an odd bunch, blaming themselves for others' misfortunes and claiming responsibility for anything they predicted. He shook his head at Chuck in dismissal and took another look around. "Hey, where'd the bird go?" "I removed it from the premises," Castiel replied. He continued at the curious poke from Dean's grace. "I thought it best to remove the source of your distress." Dean rolled his eyes at Castiel and focused his attention on the now soaking red towel in his hands. In the blink of an eye the cloth was clean and no physical evidence remained of his little freak out. Sam looked around the room in shock. It was actually cleaner than before. "Wow. Awesome," Dean smugly replied, slinging the towel over his shoulder and cocking his head to the side. Castiel frowned. "That was actually quite impressive. That's been absorbing monsters and ghosts left and right," Chuck explained as he collapsed into his chair. "Seriously, I still have nightmares about Prague." Sam and Castiel both gave Dean a disapproving stare. "Hey, I'm cut off from heaven here," Dean shot out defensively. "I have to get energy from somewhere. Added perk of a good high, so there you go." Sam shook his head, then suddenly looked at Dean in realization. "Sam Hain, you were acting kind of high right after," he said, looking at Dean with suspicion. "It's quicker than hunting down bones," Dean retorted. Sam let out a disbelieving laugh. "You're such a hypocrite." "A fallen angel." Dean snapped back, indicating himself. "At least I have an excuse." Sam scoffed and rolled his eyes. "You have no. I'm letting you make your own decisions," Dean said, cutting Sam off. "I could stop this right now. Go find your dealer and take her out. Do you really think it would be hard for me?" Sam breathed deeply through his nose, glaring at Dean. "And just how would you find her?" he asked. I have friends in low places, Dean admitted. He let a small smile slip. One in particular owes me some pretty damn big favors. Wait, you're friends? Does this connection have any information on who or what has been killing angels? Castiel cut in. Sam threw his hands up and turned away. I didn't ask someone's killing angels. Dean bit his lip and looked away. Show me what you know, he finally said. Castiel nodded and placed a hand against Dean's cheek. Their graces mingled as Castiel pushed his relevant memories forward and Dean sifted through them. Castiel pulled away as he felt irritation and embarrassment wafting from Dean. Dean. Dean tried to look anywhere but at Castiel. What did you do? Sam wearily asked for Castiel's sake. Now don't go totally ballistic on me, okay? Dean kept sending reassuring touches along his grace to Castiel. Castiel frowned in confusion. He glanced over as Chuck buried his face behind a book and was curling up into himself as if expecting an explosion. He tilted his head and let his grace return the gentle touches. Dean searched Castiel's eyes but had to switch to relying on his grace to gauge Castiel's reaction. And it wasn't like Castiel was human, so he shouldn't have a human reaction. But he could feel how Castiel was changing. Learning new mannerisms. He hoped for the best. Alistair's not exactly known for lying, he said quickly. Castiel frowned in confusion. Dean chewed his lip as he followed Castiel's path back through the memories, picking over everything Alistair had said. Castiel paused at one and replayed it as Dean felt the incredulity pouring off Castiel. There was a quick intake of breath at the realization. Dean took a step back as Castiel's wings puffed out aggressively. The lights flickered, casting feathered shadows across the walls. And then he was gone. Sam gave Dean a confused look. What happened? He asked. Dean let out a breath he hadn't known had been holding. He took that a lot better than I thought he would. What? Nothing at all, Dean replied carelessly as he wrapped an arm around Sam's shoulders. Now you were saying. I was asking why Kaz just up and left, Sam pressed. I thought you wanted to know why I'm friends with a demon. Well yeah, but that can wait. Dean ran a hand over his face. Should he tell Sam? Would he understand? Dean, just tell me please, Sam said, stepping away from Dean. In human terms, I may have slept with Alistair. Sam stared open-mouthed at Dean. Was he trailed off and had few false starts of speaking again. Please don't tell me that's how you made friends in hell. Dean laughed at Sam's remark. Oh hell no. Look, every once in a while there was the offer for torture or sex. Torture, get torture at option 3, Dean said. I chose. Sam stared at Dean in shock. Dean. Fine, Dean insisted with a reassuring smile. At Sam's frown, Dean lost his smile. Fine. Sam looked away. Dean walked up to Chuck and plucked the book from unresisting hands. My number's now all over this place, he said. The moment you see something even remotely important, I want to know about it. But. Prague, Chuck. Remember Prague? Chuck nodded. I haven't been to Paris in a long while. Maybe I'll take a little vacation there, Dean threatened. You won't be able to change it, Chuck argued. You can't fight it. Dean leaned closer. Watch me. Chuck gulped and Dean backed off, heading over to Sam. Chuck watched in silence as Dean placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. When the boys vanished, he allowed himself a small smile. Bobby jumped back as Sam and Dean appeared in front of him as a tangled mess on the floor. Sam's voice drifted up. What the hell was that? Dean groaned as he pulled away and stood up. You try, he froze when he caught sight of Bobby and the gun being pointed at his head. Hey Bobby, he said as he slowly backed away. Sam quickly grabbed Dean by the arm and gave him a pleading stare. When he received a resigned sigh in response, he turned to Bobby. It's all right, Bobby, he said, not removing his hand. It's Dean. Bobby relaxed and lowered his weapon. It's good to see you, son, he said. What was it like? Dean looked at Bobby in confusion. He looked to Sam for clarification, who just looked away. No, Bobby continued, when you had that angel in you. Dean pulled out of Sam's grip and headed to the kitchen. Your choice, Sammy. Jetting a beer. Sam and Bobby watched as Dean disappeared around the corner. Sam grimaced at Dean's shadow lingering in the hallway. He sighed and looked at Bobby. Deanus will, he wondered how he should phrase it so Bobby won't freak out. As it turns out, Seraphiel is Dean. Always has been. Bobby's eyes widened and he looked in the direction Dean had just gone. Since birth, Sam added. Demon has been an angel the whole time he's been playing dumb. Sam could only nod. He hoped he had made the right decision in telling Bobby. Seraphiel. Bobby yelled. You get your feathery ass back in here this instant. Dean slowly poked his head out from behind the corner. Scaly would be more accurate, he said with a slight grin. What? Scales. My ass. He bit his lip at Bobby's unamused glare. Alright. Never mind, he walked up and stopped just behind Sam. You've been an angel this whole time and you didn't do more. We're in the goddamned apocalypse and it didn't cross your mind that we coulda used some help. Bobby stalked up to Dean as he yelled. What about the witnesses? You coulda done something. Anything. A lot of good hunters died because of that. Dean cringed and took a step back, but Bobby followed. 2 was really low on power, he explained. I mean, I didn't get anywhere near up to speed until I absorbed Meg's energy, and well, what would you have done? Huh. If I just came right out and said, hey guys. I'm an angel. It'll just sap these guys of their energy while you whip up the spell. You won't have listened. That's how humans are. Act crazy, shoot first, then poke the carcass with a stick. Half of the witness spell was powered by guilt. Lilith aimed it at hunters cause she knew how there's always at least one they couldn't save. One victim is all it takes. You humans just rot in your guilt. The hunters that died asked for it. Sam jumped in surprise as Dean stumbled back from Bobby's punch. He moved to intervene but stopped at the look on Dean's face. He wanted this. He was asking for it. Dean felt he needed to be punished for his sins. It wasn't humans rotting in their guilt, it was Dean. Sam had to put a stop to it. Bobby. Maybe a real angel could have helped out, Dean bit out in a pained voice, cutting Sam off, but they were kind of busy. Humans just aren't worth it. Remember Sam Hain? They were gonna just wipe the entire town right off the fucking map to keep the seal safe. Dean wiped at the trickle of blood seeping from his mouth. Angels don't care. We're incapable of feeling anything. Now I know you, boy, Bobby said sternly, and I know how you get. You probably do deserve to be strung up by your heels and whipped within an inch of your life if that's even possible. You're a good kid, Dean Winchester. He laid a hand on Dean's shoulder and Dean flinched at the contact. I've hunted my fair share of monsters and I've met all sorts of people. I admit I don't know much about angels or how they work, but well, you may be some sorta angel, but you're as human as they come. Dean stared at his feet uncertainly. Clearly he hadn't been counting on Bobby's reaction. He shifted his weight and rubbed at the back of his neck. So he was pulled into a rough hug before he could say anything else. Don't you go disappearing again, you idiot angel, Bobby said into Dean's shoulder. Dean nodded. He looked at Sam over Bobby's shoulder and saw Sam giving him a reassuring smile. He tried to smile back, but it came out as a pained frown. Sam hoped things wouldn't get too weird now that they knew about Seraphiel. Although he was already making a list of what questions he should go over with Dean. Dean moped around the house for the rest of the afternoon. Every time he ran into either Sam or Bobby, he would awkwardly excuse himself and find a new room to sulk in. He eventually found his way into the kitchen where a fresh apple pie sat innocently on the middle of the table. He stared at it from the doorway. It was a trap. It had to be. But it was pie and it smelled delicious. He looked around the kitchen before slowly entering. He reached the table and cautiously lifted the pie, checking underneath. It looked safe. He reached out with his senses and could feel Bobby and Sam waiting just out of sight. Maybe it was a peace offering. That had to be it. He was practically immortal and he had yet to come across a seal he couldn't weasel his way past. Sam had to have figured that out by now. Encouraged by his positive thinking, Dean brought the pie over to the counter and fished through the drawers for a fork. The moment he took his first bite, he heard the sliding doors slam shut. He sighed and looked up to see the frowning faces of Sam and Bobby. Okay, so maybe it wasn't a peace offering. No, he said, I could always just fly off. You've been avoiding us all afternoon, Sam pointed out. Can you blame us for wanting to talk? Dean looked away. What if I don't want to talk about it? He asked. I think you owe us a few answers, Seraphiel, Bobby said. Neither of us have been running around pretending to be people we ain't. At the mention of his name, Dean's attention snapped to Bobby. He really wasn't up for discussing his past, but he needed their trust and acceptance. He took another bite of the pie. No one said he had to be interrogated on an empty stomach. Fine. Shoot. None orgy. Dean barely managed to swallow his food. Well, I was bored. He said between coughs. And there were some pretty hot nuns. He smirked. It was a safe enough topic. Quite possibly one of the tamest things had done by present standards. Isabella was pretty easy to possess, he said with a shrug. I actually got the idea from her. She became a nun out of penance for digging other chicks. He let out a soft laugh. Nuns are easy after you show them a few miracles. Sam rolled his eyes as Bobby gave Dean a stern look. I hope you ain't been possessing anyone recently, said Bobby. Dean shifted uneasily. Justice. There's no soul in here, he added quickly, gesturing to himself. Yes, Sam told me about it. So what would happen if y'all left? Sam asked. Dean frowned in confusion. I mean, if you stopped possessing him. I'm the only thing keeping this mere ubbity alive, Dean replied, not sure how to ease Sam's discomfort. You were going to say meat suit, Sam softly accused, shaking his head. Do angels really think so little of us? Dean didn't respond. He chose to take another bite of the pie instead. Possession and vessel usage was always a sticky topic with humans, and he didn't know what he could say that wouldn't sound callous. Sam went up to Dean and snatched the pie away. Damn it, Dean. Hey. Dean reached for the pie, but Sam held it just out of reach. Dean glared up at Sam. "You can have the rest after," Sam stated. Dean tilted his chin up. In the blink of an eye the space he previously occupied was vacated and Sam's hand was empty. Sam brought his hand down as a fist and slammed it on the counter. "No need to act like a little bitch, Sammy." Sam spun around and found Dean sitting calmly at the table. Dean had a fork in one hand and a beer in the other. He took a swig of beer looking very pleased with himself. He regarded Sam's and Bobby's shocked expressions. "Look, you'll answer your stupid questions," he said. "But Sam, you have no idea what it's like. This ain't an easy topic for me. It wasn't that bad for the past couple hundred years, but now, angels are running around on Earth again. They don't bother hiding their presence. I can feel them. I can feel their purity. At least I don't have to look at my wings. But them? They're a constant reminder of how I screwed up. How my father never lifted a finger to stop me. Didn't stop them from keeping me out of heaven. The only order he gave was for them not to kill me. But with how things seem to be going on upstairs right now, I'm not so sure that order still stands." Anna had mentioned how God wanted her dead, Sam said. "You think?" Dean scoffed and looked out the window. "Yeah, she also told me how only 4 angels have ever seen God. I know that's a load of bull." Bobby sat at the table across from Dean. "Well then it sounds like those 4 angels probably know what's going on," he said. "Did she tell you which 4? Dean contemplated the question as he took another bite. "Well, I don't count anymore," he said. "Definitely Michael the little suck ass, maybe Raphael." "So archangels?" Sam asked. "I mean they're pretty high up on the ladder, right?" Dean rolled his eyes. "Archangels are actually one level above cause. They're not as high up as you think. They'd like to think so. There were 9 levels." "Wait, were? What you mean were?" Bobby cut in. "There were a lot of casualties on both sides during the war. The entire second sphere was divided among the lower ranks," Dean explained. "Even though we lost, those of us who survived were given a choice. Leave or stay and face punishment, probably because so many were lost. I was the only one to follow Lucifer. By the time I reached hell, Lucifer had already created a small army of demons." Dean let out a bitter laugh. "I wanna know the sick part. He named his first batch after our dead brothers and sisters. I guess he tried to give them their personalities too. Just look at Lilith. Her namesake was always smiling and loved to play. Always got up to so much mischief. She was the first one he made." "Why did you side with Lucifer anyway?" Sam asked. "He was my brother boyfriend, angel friend. Kinda sorta significant other. It's hard to explain," Dean said. "I didn't think what he wanted to do was right, but I supported him. We were close. He was older and has this way with words. I wasn't the only one that followed him. Like I said before, angels don't really care about humans. Some even hate you for being loved so much by our father and not having to do anything in return. You don't even have to believe in him," he finished, not bothering to hide the bitterness in his voice as he took a swig of beer. "So where did Lucifer rank in heaven?" Sam asked. "How much higher was he than you?" Dean almost spat out the beer he was drinking. He tried to contain his laughter, but it came out as a loud snort. "Outrank me? No one outranked me," he stated smugly. "Well, me and Metatron, but yeah, I said he was older, not higher up on the food chain. Lucifer was the leader of the powers, so bottom rung of the second sphere." "That makes sense," Bobby commented. "What does? If you wanted to stage a rebellion, wouldn't you want powerful allies?" Bobby asked. "It's nice to know that you weren't fucking buying an idiot." Dean's expression darkened. "That's not how it was," he growled. "I was made for him." When he realized what he had just said, Dean shut his mouth with a snap. It was an intimate detail about himself he shared with no one. It was a fluke that he even knew about it. What? Sam leaned closer, trying to catch Dean's eye. "Every angel was made for a reason," Dean quickly explained. "We all have a purpose to serve." "Our purpose was?" "I don't want to talk about it," Dean shouted as the lights flickered. He looked up apologetically at Sam and Bobby. "Sorry, it's a touchy subject." Bobby gave a curt nod and Sam opened his mouth to speak again but never got the chance. "Oh come on," Dean yelled out. He threw his arms up in frustration. "I don't know if this is an interrogation or an intervention." "What?" Sam gave Dean an uncertain look. The sound of wings filled the room and Castiel appeared behind Dean looking as apathetic as ever and splattered with blood. Dean caught Sam's shocked expression but brushed it off as a reaction to Castiel's sudden appearance. Without turning, he reached out with his grace to Castiel and quickly drew back at the immense guilt he felt. He slowly turned in his chair to face Castiel. "Umkaz. Whose blood is that?" he asked, allowing his grace to carefully brush against Castiel's. Castiel looked to the floor. All Dean could feel was Castiel's guilt and fear of discovery. "It would be better if we spoke in private," Castiel said. Dean looked from Castiel to Sam. "I'll be right back," he said. "I promise." Sam nodded. With a fluttering of wings he was left alone with Bobby. Bobby let out a sigh as he stood from the table. "If you see your brother before me, tell him I want this place angel-proofed," he said as he headed out of the kitchen. "Damned angels can use the door same as everyone else." Dean appeared shortly after Castiel. They had landed in an abandoned factory, and Dean could feel the energies of a few lingering spirits keeping well away from the pair. He pulled his attention away from the ghosts to focus on Castiel. Castiel was frowning at the floor. "I'm so sorry, Seraphiel," he said, breaking the silence. If we had found you sooner." He looked up when Dean's hand rested on his shoulder. "Come on, cuz," Dean said in a light tone. "It was just hell. I mean, the things I've done, I probably deserve worse." Castiel stared at Dean in disbelief. "What Alistair did to you, no one deserves that. Least of all you." Dean didn't acknowledge Castiel, choosing instead to pick at the dried blood on Castiel's coat. He felt Castiel pressing, asking to be let into his grace to get a better understanding of Dean and his emotions. He sighed and opened up, knowing the awfulness he presented of anger, frustration, guilt and a deep self-loathing that Castiel could never hope to understand. "Dean? Who was this?" Dean crumbled the dried blood between his fingers. He felt Castiel's guilt kick up again. He met Castiel's eyes. "Cause. What happened?" "Alistair," Castiel quietly replied. "I confronted him about you. And he kept gloating. He told me everything." Dean nodded and looked away. "So you decided to tear him a new hole. What set you off?" "The fact that every few years I'd get it in my head that the sex won't be as bad as the torture. Or when I changed my mind he didn't stop." His voice had started steady enough but ended shaking with bitter rage and resentment. "His descriptions made me quite angry," Castiel admitted. "But that did not set me off." Dean looked back up. He tried to think of what could possibly upset Castiel enough to physically attack Alistair rather than just smite him. "Then what?" "It was how he spoke of your wings." Dean gave a confused stare. "Please don't tell me he recited poetry." Castiel tilted his head slightly. "No, he was rather explicit about how sensitive they are." Dean felt sick to his stomach. His curiosity got the best of him and he reached for Castiel's memories. He suppressed a shudder as Alistair's laugh echoed through the memory. "You're awfully sensitive about sweet little Seraphiel, and he is a sweet piece of ass, isn't he? That vessel of his ain't half bad, but those wings. So soft. So responsive. On our special days he would always end up begging for me to stop. To just rip the flesh from his bone instead. All I had to do was run one finger along the base of his wings and he would make the prettiest noises. He would writhe in pleasure as he begged for it all to stop. Have you touched them yet? If you haven't, you should try squeezing what's left of his smallest Y." There was a loud crack as Castiel punched Alistair and Alistair laughed through a bloody grin. Dean cut the memory short as he saw Castiel turn to a nearby table holding various tools, salt and holy water. Dean didn't know what to say. Castiel avoided Dean's gaze. "I believe I became jealous. That he experienced you in such a way and then hurt you for the gift you gave. And he wanted to make him pay for causing you such pain," he eventually said. "I lost control." "Happens to the best of us," Dean replied as he awkwardly patted Castiel's shoulder. "Happens to me a lot." Castiel sighed. "I killed him." "Oh." Dean pulled his hand back. "Was kin to hoppin' I'd get to do that." "I'm sorry." Dean shrugged. "No problem. He was just a demon. His tormentor was dead. Even though he wanted to have the pleasure of bringing Alistair a slow and agonizing death, he was at the very least the reason for the demon's death." Castiel looked up. "We needed him alive. Someone is going to find out. Soon." Dean scoffed. "Alive? What for? Oh. Right." He could feel the helplessness emanating from Castiel. "Well, I'm pretty sure demons aren't behind it." "But who else would want angels dead?" Castiel asked. "'Cause the most a demon could do to you is send your ass back to heaven." "Inconvenient, yes, but nowhere near enough to kill you," Dean explained. Then a thought struck him. Unless he had an angel's blade. "What? Have any gone missing?" He followed along as Castiel skimmed through thoughts and memories but came up empty. "Not that I'm aware of." "Then I hate to break it to you, cuz but last time angels started dropping like flies was when Lucifer rebelled." Dean carefully ran his grace along Castiel's, hoping the other angel wouldn't react too badly to the revelation. He felt a slight confusion coming from Castiel as well as disbelief. "You're implying an angel is behind these deaths," Castiel said softly. Dean embraced Castiel with his grace sending waves of reassurance against the disbelief. He felt a soft numbness in response. "Look, go back to heaven and lay low for a while," he said. "What about Alistair?" Dean shrugged and waved a hand in a vague gesture. "Tell them I was torturing him for information and broke free. Demon backup came. Or something. Tell them you had to kill Alistair in order to save me." Castiel gave Dean a doubtful look. "Trust me. According to all your buddies, I'm human and entirely incapable of even tying my own shoes. They'll buy it." Castiel sighed and looked away. Very well. Dean nodded and turned away. Good. Now that dilemma's out of the way, I have to get back, he said as he let his senses go back to following the ghosts. Perhaps he should clean house before going back. It was the apocalypse after all. He needed to be in tip-top shape. He was sharply pulled back to himself when a pair of arms wrapped around him. He relaxed into Castiel's hold and let his grace mingle. He let out a sigh as he could still feel deep regret coming from Castiel. Do you forgive me? Castiel asked. Dean had to bite his tongue. Part of him wanted to retort with a smart-assed comment, but he knew Castiel still had an uneasy handle on informal human language and sentiment. He ran his hand along Castiel's arms. I forgive you, he replied. He smiled when Castiel hugged more tightly and he felt Castiel's guilt ease away. At least one of them felt better. He caught a small thread of need from Castiel and followed it coming across wariness. He poked further looking for context. A need to forgive and wariness of reaction. He froze at the implication. Castiel took a deep breath inhaling Dean's human scent. Dean Seraphiel, Castiel said softly. I forgive you. Dean let out a nervous laugh. Eerie didn't ask. I mean, what for? If it was something small, something stupid, he could handle it. For siding with Lucifer, Castiel replied. For leading the innocent astray. For everything. Dean gave a half-hearted pull, but Castiel held him tightly in place. No, Castiel couldn't forgive Seraphiel for his actions. Forgive his actions as Dean, yes. But as Seraphiel? He was responsible for so much pain and suffering, how could anyone forgive him? He didn't deserve forgiveness. His father had proven that through his silence. Please, Seraphiel, Castiel said and wrapped his wings around them. Please accept my forgiveness. Dean struggled against Castiel's hold. Don't call me that. How can you forgive me? Do you have any idea how many angels I personally killed in Lucifer's name? I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Dean pulled harder and desperately tried to push Castiel's grace away. He was having a hard time dividing his attention. And who are you to forgive me? Just some foot soldier stationed on Earth. You have no say in anything. No power. They probably didn't even call on you during the rebellion, you don't matter. Castiel ignored Dean's hurtful shouts and delved deeper into Dean's grace, leaving behind a trail of love and forgiveness. I forgive you, Seraphiel, he repeated. No, you don't. Dean shrieked as he tried to flap his wings out in an attempt to dislodge Castiel. The sounds of glass shattering echoed throughout the building when he sent out a short burst of energy. No one had ever gotten so far into his grace before. Not even Lucifer, who had always been content to lounge closer to the surface. He was completely disoriented. He could feel Castiel curiously pressing against some of his memories. If Castiel wanted to see just what Seraphiel had done, then fine. He stopped resisting and pushed his memories of the war forward. Brothers and sisters who had fallen under his blade. Humans whose lives he had destroyed. Humans he put on the path to becoming demons. He just wanted Castiel to understand that he couldn't be forgiven. If God couldn't forgive him, then how could Castiel? He felt the sadness over his memories emanating from Castiel and thought had proven Castiel wrong, but then he focused on the emotion. It wasn't sadness for the lives he affected, it was for Seraphiel. For the angel that had fallen so far and for so long. So Dean pushed more forward, each worse than the last. If Castiel wanted to play confessional, then Dean would make him regret it. For each memory Castiel saw, he placed a kiss on the back of Dean's neck and repeated, I forgive you, Seraphiel. Dean fought hard against Castiel. He kicked and screamed obscenities. He threw his power around, knocking neglected factory equipment into walls, as if they weighed nothing. But Castiel would not budge. He clawed frantically at the arms wrapped protectively around him. His energy was quickly diminishing. Another kiss and another whispered forgiveness in his ear. He cringed as he panted, completely exhausted. It was the complete opposite of his exile. The hatred and debilitating attacks replaced by love and a tender protectiveness. He was being attacked by Castiel's love and forgiveness on all sides. He tried to rally his energy for another push against Castiel, but found that he had managed to burn through it all. Even his limbs were having trouble cooperating. He was reminded of being dragged from hell and fighting against Castiel all the way. He let out a mournful laugh. He was back to being next to useless again. At least this time he wouldn't have to sneak around sniping recharges. He instantly felt a pang of guilt for not telling Sam. For letting Sam find out in the worst way possible. Lost in his misery, he didn't struggle as Castiel turned him around. He reluctantly met Castiel's eyes when his chin was tilted up. Castiel gave Dean a sad smile and softly kissed him. I forgive you, Dean, he said when he pulled back. Dean stared at Castiel in disbelief and shock. Yes, there was the forgiveness and love. But most of all there was Castiel's acceptance. Of who he had been and who he had become. He clung onto Castiel for support as exhaustion from his struggles catching up to him. He blinked as Castiel reached up and wiped away the tears from his cheeks. Will you accept my forgiveness? Castiel hesitantly asked. Dean stared silently at Castiel for a few minutes. He just couldn't comprehend why Castiel would forgive him and accept him for who he was. He didn't deserve this. He had been waiting for so long for his father to either punish or forgive him. Anything. But clearly his father had abandoned him. The youth had been brought back from hell. His father must have given the order unless heaven was just working on a pre-existing checklist. Castiel had mentioned how the one who started the apocalypse would be the one to end it. Was his vessel part of a much deeper prophecy than he had originally thought? He had been out of the loop for such a long time he barely knew anything on the seals. If heaven really was on autopilot, then what should he do? Dean's thoughts came to a grinding halt as Castiel kissed him thoroughly. Dean. What? He tried to recall Castiel's question. Do you accept my forgiveness? Right, Dean sighed. Why? How can you just forgive all that? Castiel smiled at Dean and replied, because I love you. Well yeah, obviously, Dean said dismissively. Of course Castiel loved him, but that didn't mean anything. Dean still loved Lucifer. It didn't mean he was going to drop everything and help out with the apocalypse. He still loved Uriel and Michael and everyone still in heaven, but that didn't make them any less of a big bag of self-righteous dicks. Castiel took on a frustrated frown. No, you misunderstand, he said. He let out a pulse of energy along his grace and into Dean's. No human word could possibly describe how he felt. Dean was overcome with the loving feelings he was getting from Castiel. It was much more than the love of friends or lovers. More than a passing interest in something new. More than anything he had felt from Castiel before. Castiel wanted to spend eternity with him. Stay with him and kiss away his pains and worries. A few images leaked through the connection, accidental or on purpose, Dean wasn't sure. But he could easily tell that Castiel was very interested in exploring the more physical aspects of their relationship. And the boring angel had quite the imagination. Dean refused to believe that he was blushing. The burning heat on his cheeks came from Castiel's need. The need to be with Dean. To stand by him. To protect him. The absolute willingness to fall for him. Dean tightly shut his eyes at the realization. Sure, Castiel may have told him as much before, but a verbal admission was nothing compared to the knowledge and promises passed through grace. To accept, Dean managed to say through his tears. Everything he wanted, everything he needed was being offered to him. I accept everything. But not that. He looked pleadingly at Castiel. Don't fall. Don't leave heaven. Not for me. But. No. Please don't make me responsible for that, Dean begged. You want me to be happy. Then stay in heaven. Promise me. Castiel frowned, but not at all the same. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and collapsed against Castiel. He hummed happily as fingers trailed through his hair and down to his wings. For a brief moment he felt like he was back in heaven. Thank you, he said quietly. You should get back to your brother, Castiel said. Dean nodded into Castiel's chest. Yeah, just let me grab a quick bite, he muttered. Castiel stiffened at the prospect of Dean snagging a ghost. Even though he didn't like it, he could understand Dean's need to replenish lost energy by draining other beings. He did, however, take issue with the fact that Dean was being so casual about it. He let Dean know his disapproval by quickly flying them both back to Bobby's. Bobby dropped his beer, the bottle shattering on the floor. Jesus fucking Christ. Sam rushed into the kitchen expecting the worst. What he found was his brother desperately clutching onto Castiel inches in front of Bobby. Dean. Are you alright? Castiel carefully guided Dean to the nearest chair. Dean slumped against the table and glared up at Castiel. What did I say about dragging me along? He growled. You do not possess the energy for flight at present, Castiel stated. I was gonna fix that. Castiel looked at the floor. I did not want you to pursue your old habits, he hesitantly admitted. What habits? Sam asked. The usual, Dean replied. Apparently cause doesn't want me snacking on ghosts. He huffed in annoyance. It's not like I have much of a choice, Igno. I wish you felt otherwise, Castiel sadly replied. But their graces still entwined. Dean started poking around trying to figure out just what Castiel was on about. He scratched at his head before replying. Look, I know you don't like it, you and Sammy, he said, looking at Sam. Beauty can't just wait around for my power to slowly come back. Not right now, at least. Castiel nodded. I understand your reasoning. But you don't like it, Dean said. I get it. Oh, with the dead angel's problem. Mike may be a jerk, but he likes rules. Ask him if any angel blades are unaccounted for since you didn't find anything on the demon front. Hell, take a closer look and suss out your traitor. I will do that, Castiel said. I should get back. Please don't do anything too drastic. Well, keep him out of trouble, Bobby said. Castiel gave Bobby a quick nod before vanishing. With Castiel's disappearance, Dean felt empty and alone. He barely registered Sam's presence by his side. Dean? Dean. Hey, snap out of it, Sam said as he gently shook his brother. He snapped his fingers in front of Dean's face. What? Dean half-whined as he rolled his head in Sam's direction. Are you okay? Dean rolled his eyes and shrugged. What the hell happened? Bobby asked. You were just fine when you left. Intervention. Dean offered as he lazily rubbed his neck. At the confused looks he was receiving he elaborated. Cause got it in his head that he needed to forgive me. And shove it down my throat. Trying to keep him out of my grace took a lot out of me. Sam frowned at Dean. I thought you two were us. Sam waved his hands around each other as he faltered. Where I dunno man. It's complicated. Wait, you and that angel are? Bobby paused. Complicated, Dean ground out. That's an angel, Bobby shot back. Ain't there some sorta rule against that? Dean gaped at Bobby, then turned his attention to Sam. What is it with you guys? Is there some human thing where you're just incapable of believing angels can fuck around? Well, angels are sexless, right? Sam said, blushing lightly. I mean you I get. But how would they are intimate? For grace, but that's different. Or if you want to get physical, try our wings. I happen to like my tail being stoked, Dean replied. It was surreal. He never dreamed that he would be speaking to Sam about an angelic version of the birds and the bees talk. Tail? Sam repeated. Dean threw his arms up in frustration. I'm not having this conversation anymore. He declared. Today has been a little too fucked up for my tastes. He stood up and unsteadily made his way out of the kitchen, gripping the doorframe as his head swam and his vision blacked out. He closed his eyes and waited for the feeling to pass. The moment he could stand on his own he was going to hunt down something. He was weaker than he was from his return trip from hell. Sam quickly stepped up to Dean, ready to catch him. Dean waved Sam and Bobby off. I'm fine. I'm gonna crash on the couch for a while, he said. A long while. He quickly left the room and made his way to the couch. Bobby sighed as a loud crash came from Dean's direction. I can fix that, Dean's voice shouted out. Later. Bobby gave Sam a look. I think I was happier not knowing about him. Sam shrugged in response. Dean stared at the ceiling. He had just slept. Actually slept. And dreamt. Not just traipsing along some other being's dreamscape, but a real dream spawned from what he presumed was his imagination. In his dream Sam was an antlered banana and the walls had bled light bulbs. He would have found it amusing had it not frightened him to the core. Angels didn't dream. He couldn't dream. Dean shifted uncomfortably on the couch before sitting up. He felt it. Rested but still without power. His body was sore and his wings hurt. He brought his wings out and sighed at the slight relief from the constant throb. He hoped everything was due to his lack of energy. Sam entered the room just as Dean stood and stretched. He could just make out the faint shadow of Dean's wings being cast across the wall. Are you feeling better? He asked. Dean popped a few joints as he shook his head. Not really, he replied. He looked at Sam and wondered if he should mention his dream. Probably. So I had this dream. Yeah? Sam came further into the room, looking down at his notebook with a worried frown. Dean waited until Sam finally looked at him. That's the whole point, Sam. I dreamt. Sam frowned at the worry evident in Dean's voice. Well, what was it about? No, Sammy. Dean let out a frustrated sigh as he ran his hand through his hair. I have never had a dream. He held up a hand when he saw Sam was about to argue. And it's not an issue of not remembering dreams. I'm not human. I don't need sleep. When my body's asleep, I'm astral projecting or some shit. Not dreaming. Sam watched as his brother went from somewhat calm to absolutely frantic. Well, maybe it's because you're so low on energy, he offered. You ain't a human vessel, he said uneasily. Maybe that has something to do with it. Dean frowned and looked away. I hope that's it. I've never been this low, Sammy, he admitted. Then we'll just find a nice easy job. I've gone through all the voicemails and found a few hauntings, Sam said as he raised his notebook. After we. Dean snatched the list from Sam. Gost the easiest liquids to solids and all that. Sam tried to retrieve the notebook before Dean. Then how about the haunting over in northern Iowa? It's close and. Woes Adam. Sam's shoulders slumped in defeat. He left a message on Dad's phone. Never heard of him. Hunter needin' help. Not really. Dean looked up at Sam. He studied his brother for a moment and decided he didn't like what he was seeing. Sam? Woes Adam. Sam bit his lip. Hess, I think Hess our brother. Dean stared at Sam in disbelief. Bullshit. I already looked him up. Hess a real person, and about 9 months before he was born Dad was in Wyndham on a hunt. I found a newspaper article with his picture and 2 pages are torn out of Dad's journal. So? That don't mean shit and you know it. Sam sighed. Look, well, go check out that haunting, then we can see about Adam. I mean, if he is lying then at least well be prepared, he reasoned. He growled in frustration as he watched Dean dial Adam's number. Dean ignored Sam's reactions to the harsh tone he took with the kid on the other end of the line. If he had wanted to play nice and soften the blow of John's death, then Sam should have called Adam himself. When Dean finally disconnected the call, he turned to Sam. "We're going to Minnesota." "Dean? We're gonna find out what that thing is and take it out," he said as he shoved the notebook at Sam and headed out of the room. "And what if he really is our brother?" Dean stopped short. He hadn't thought about it. If everything Adam had said was true, then we give him our condolences and stay out of his life. Hell, be better off. Sam reluctantly nodded. Dean was getting more and more agitated the closer they got to Wyndham. Sam had managed to talk Dean into meeting up with Adam the next day. Barely. Sam's reasoning of having an extra day to get used to the thought of potentially having another brother made sense to Dean, but he didn't have to like it. Or get used to it. At night Dean dreamt he was back in heaven. He had his father's love. Lucifer was behaving, and Castiel was by Dean's side. It was perfect. When he awoke, he locked himself in the bathroom until he could stop crying. He was grateful that Sam didn't say anything. This was going to be a shitty day. He just knew it. They arrived at the diner they had agreed to meet at, and Sam was beginning to think that they should have called Adam up and postponed their meeting even longer. Dean was obviously miserable. Tired and emotionally exhausted, he was in no state to handle a delicate situation. Sam winced as Dean snapped at the waitress. He silently watched as Dean emptied the glass and filled it with holy water. He wasn't surprised when Dean pulled out the silverware and replaced the diner's plain utensils. He understood that there was a high possibility that their so-called long-lost brother was a trap, but he just couldn't understand why Dean was so offended by the whole idea. Things went downhill quickly when Adam showed up. Sam wasn't quite sure what was up with Dean. Even after Adam passed Dean's tests, Dean still wouldn't buy that Adam was their brother. Sam was just about to follow Dean out the diner when Adam called out to Dean. "I can prove it." Sam and Dean ended up in the Milligan household looking around for clues. Dean couldn't put his finger on it, but something just wasn't right about Adam. Sure, the kid's story was plausible, and Sam's evidence backed it up, but something was off. And then there were the family photos. Hugs Miles' baseball. He never got to go to a baseball game. He knew it shouldn't bug him as much as it did. John wasn't even his real father, but it was like one big reminder. As much as Dean had tried to be a good son to John Winchester, the neglect he experienced only served to remind him of the absence of his real father. Quite simply, Dean was jealous. He would have traded all the time spent in John's presence for a few short visits if it had meant he'd have gotten John's love and attention. Dean shook the thoughts from his head and focused back on Adam. He wondered if Adam's mother was human. There were plenty of half-breeds running around. But he was pretty sure that John would have been more careful about something like that. He desperately wished he had his powers back. He hated being so useless. So human. Dean felt even more unsure when he found bits of Adam's mother in the ventilation. He couldn't get a decent read off of the chunks. Human, not human, age nothing. Checking the living for bare minimum information was a little easier than the meat mulch he found. Whatever was going on, at least he could cross off the idea that Adam was the monster John had hunted. The kid didn't feel old enough. And exact age was still hard, but unless John had been hunting a baby or toddler monster, then Adam wasn't it. In the privacy of their motel room, Dean voiced his suspicions. Sam suggested that paranoia was playing tricks on him. Dean had to admit that it was entirely possible. But he still felt like he had no reason to trust Adam. He reluctantly admitted to Sam that they should have gone on the ghost hunt first. Sam gave Dean an encouraging smile before Adam burst through the door demanding answers. Dean let out a frustrated growl as Sam told Adam the truth. Much to Dean's irritation and surprise, Adam took the news quite well. Family or not, he was just too trusting. It was very suspicious. Dean played his mistrust of Adam off as upholding their father's intentions of protecting Adam. He could understand Adam wanting to avenge his mother's death, but the boy was in no position to be of any help. Dean was confused and annoyed. He needed to get out of the small room and clear his head. He figured Sam could keep an eye on Adam while he did some investigating on his own. At least it was one thing he could still do. He found out a little bit more on what had happened 17 years ago, but nothing to help narrow down what they were after. He arrived back at the motel just in time to rescue Sam from being dragged into the sewers. He dipped his fingers in the fresh blood but refrained from tasting it. One thing that both Sam and Dean agreed on was that Adam didn't need to know what Dean really was. Not yet. Dean was less than thrilled when Sam hinted at using Adam as bait. Even less so at the prospect of training the kid and bringing him into the life of a hunter. But Adam wanted it and Sam wanted to do it, so Dean let them have their fun. Dean wanted the hunt to be over. Every day they spent on the job meant another night of dreaming. He didn't know how much more he could take. How could humans stand it? Being shown such bliss and happiness only to have it ripped away every morning. He was contemplating the meaning of his latest dream when Sam started reciting a very familiar speech to Adam. It seemed so wrong coming from Sam. Dean pulled Sam aside, hoping that Sam was going to reveal that he was giving the speech to Adam in order to scare him off. Apparently that was not the case. "Essa Winchester," Hess already cursed Sam said cynically, momentarily throwing Dean off. Sam couldn't know about the bloodline. About being Lucifer's true vessel. No, Sam was simply referring to all the shit going on in their lives. Some of it was a little more extreme than what the average hunter came across, but it was still pretty standard. And if Adam really was their brother human or some little half-breed, Dean was going to hunt down the monster after him and prove they weren't cursed. He would take another look and find it. And kill it. Back in the mausoleum, Dean extended his senses out as far as he could. He could just make out the faint traces of a supernatural creature in one of the corners. He found a loose stone and the narrow tunnel hidden behind. It reeked of death. He sighed, not looking forward to having to crawl through the hole. He really wished he could just zap over to the other side. He was about to enter the hole when he felt a presence lingering just outside the mausoleum. He set down the flashlight and slowly, carefully edged away from the hole. He kept low and made his way back to the entrance. He tightened his grip on his crowbar and came out swinging. He hit the creature squarely in the chest. He raised the crowbar for another swing as he watched the blonde stumble against the wall. He reached out, trying to get a feel for what he was dealing with. It felt just like Adam, and about the same age too. When the creature looked up, Dean was greeted with Kate Milligan's face. He reflexively took a step back. There was no way she could still be alive. There was too much blood, and the thing in front of him was too young. Not a shapeshifter missing corpses. They're a ghoul. No, I find that term racist, the ghoul replied before charging at Dean. Dean took a steadying breath. He dropped the crowbar and slammed his hand against the ghoul's head. He opened the path to the void where his power should be. Black and red wafts of energy engulfed his hand and the ghoul's head. He almost pulled back when bright white sparks burst forth. When there was no life left in the ghoul, Dean pulled his hand back with a snap. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. He really should have started with a ghost. He winced as he stood. The feeling made him miss how the witnesses were like vitamin-packed gummies. Easy to swallow and digest compared to downing the dry and tasteless granola bar that was the ghoul. Everything was brighter. He might not have been completely back to speed, but he could at least feel the fresh corpses nearby tainted by the ghoul's work. He flitted into the hidden chamber and located Joe, Kate and Adam. Poor Adam. The kid really was John's third son. At least he was in a better place. Even with that thought, Dean felt a flash of anger. Anger at himself for being jealous, anger for the life cut short, and anger at the ghoul parading around as Adam playing them for fools. He flew back outside and stood over the ghoul's corpse. He really shouldn't, but he wanted to catch the other ghoul off guard. He would need this ghoul's scent for that. A knife materialized in his hand and he set to work. Dean landed just outside the front door of the Milligan house. He could pinpoint the ghoul's location, and Sam was right there too. No doubt waiting over the open vent in the master bedroom. He threw open the door and entered the house. He called out to Adam with a pitch-perfect imitation of Kate's voice. He listened as Adam ran downstairs, closely followed by Sam. "Mom? Mo D." Dean. Adam looked wildly around, scenting the air. Sam tilted his head in question at Dean. Dean smiled at his brother in response. "Hope you don't mind, Sammy, but I grabbed a quick bite while I was out," he said. He turned to Adam and let his easy smile slip to a smirk. "I brought you some leftovers." "Where's my mom?" the ghoul asked, pacing back and forth. "I know, I heard her." "Yeah, sorry. Just a cheap trick," Dean replied with a shrug. "But here's what's left of your sister or brother or whatever it is you guys are." Dean held out his hand, revealing a bloodied heart. "Ghouls eat dead things, right?" The ghoul screeched in response, and Dean brought out his wings. The lights flickered, revealing feathered shadows on the walls, and the ghoul shrank back. "What are you?" Sam had brought up his shotgun and was aiming it at the ghoul's head. "Dean. This one's all yours, Sam," Dean replied. The ghoul turned toward Sam and he blew its head off. Sam grimaced as the body twitched on the floor. He looked over at Dean. "So you're good now?" he asked. Dean tossed a heart on the floor next to the ghoul. He shook his hand out and the blood vanished. "I'm good enough," he replied. He was still a little put off by the sparks of white light from earlier. He brushed it off as being completely depleted of his energy and not working his way up from the residual energy of ghosts to the more robust life force of a solid creature. "Let's clean up this mess and give Adam a proper burial." Sam frowned at Dean in confusion. "Adam, the real Adam, really was our brother. The pictures, the journal, none of that was faked. I found his body in the cemetery." "So we were too late," Sam said quietly. Dean shook his head. "We didn't know. There was no way we could have saved him. He didn't deserve this." Dean nodded in agreement. They cleaned up their mess and gave Adam a hunter's funeral on Dean's insistence. That night Dean didn't sleep. For a short while he watched Sam sleep. He no longer felt his body's exhaustion pulling at him, and he was grateful. Or he thought he was. He had quickly come to feeling apprehension over falling asleep, but now as he watched Sam he couldn't help but want the bliss he had attained in his dreams. Even if it was for a teasingly short time and completely intangible. He sighed to himself and pulled out the list of jobs Sam had made. He hoped sapping a few ghosts would prevent the white sparks from returning. Nip that shit in the bud. Pastille flew quickly. He had to warn Dean. He stretched his senses far and felt no other angels in his immediate vicinity. He landed in a vacant factory and looked around before sending a desperate prayer to God for some sort of sign. Some clue. There was no response. Not that he was really expecting one. He did another sweep of the area with his senses before reaching out with his grace to locate Dean. He was surprised to find Dean already asleep. Pastille looked around the dreamscape. It was quite simple. A pier on a quiet lake with trees in the distance. He looked down at Dean, uncertain as to what was going on. Dean looked up and frowned at Castile. Are you real or did I just make you up? I am very much real. What is going on? Castile asked as he looked across the lake. He had trouble focusing on the trees, their forms kept bleeding into each other. Dean coughed self-consciously and looked away in embarrassment. I am trying my hand at dreaming. Just simple stuff right now. Castile stared at Dean in confusion. Why? Dean fiddled with the fishing rod. You left me pretty drained. I slept. I dreamt. Castile stared at Dean in surprise. How? What was it like? He asked, genuinely curious. Dean let out a bitter laugh. It sucked. Castile frowned, not understanding why Dean would pursue something that so clearly caused him pain. He looked away, refocusing on why he was appearing to Dean within a dream. We need to talk. I have something of great importance to tell you. Dean looked up at Castile with wary interest. Is this something I want to know? Castile shook his head. No. Dean sighed and looked back out at the lake. So what so important that you can't tell me in person? Castile opened his mouth and quickly shut it. There was an angelic presence closing in on him. There was no time. He brushed Dean's grace with his own and sent his location to Dean just before vanishing. Dean's head snapped in Castile's direction, but he was already gone. Along with the factory's location, Castile had unwittingly sent his fear and desperation. Dean immediately woke up and pulled himself up from the couch. Sam. He yelled out. You have 5 minutes, then we're heading out. Dean scanned the area with his senses as he pulled up to the factory. It was the right place, but there was no sign of Castile. Pest's not here, he said gruffly. Well, maybe he left a note. Sam said as his eyes swept over the old building. I mean, he must have left a clue or something if it was that important. Dean sighed as he leaned against the steering wheel. Yeah, maybe, he said doubtfully. Upon entering the building, they found the place a complete mess. Dean could feel slight traces of angelic power lingering. There was a fight here, Dean said as he stepped over a fallen beam. Demons? Angels, Dean corrected as his flashlight settled on the large Enochian banishing spell. What did you get yourself into, cause? He muttered. Dean. I found him. Sam shouted from close by. Dean did a quick sweep but found no sign of the angel. Just a human. As he got closer, he saw Castile's vessel lying unconscious in a pile of rubble. Why would Castile leave his vessel? What was so urgent? Before Dean could correct him, Sam was already addressing the human by Castile's name. Castile? No, not Castile. It's me, the human replied in daze. Who? Sam asked. Jimmy. Dean stared as Sam helped Jimmy stand. He still felt a vague attraction to the man, but without Castile's presence and grace it just wasn't the same. He wondered if Castile would return. Did someone in heaven find out about them? About Seraphiel? Was Castile being punished? Would he ever return? Dean's heart clenched at the thought. If Castile was locked up in heaven, then no. He refused to believe it. Castile would return. And when he did, he would need his vessel. So until that time, Dean would need to keep Jimmy safe. Dean rubbed his neck as he looked through the motel window at Jimmy, who was still enjoying his fast food. I'm gonna try looking for cause. See what I can find out, he said. What should I tell Jimmy? Sam asked. Nothing. I'm leaving my body here. What? Won't that make you out it or something? It'll be back before rigor mortis sets in, Dean replied. Rigor, Dean. Look, him kinda recognizable, Dean said defensively. Both as a human and an angel. And he can't have anyone making the connection. But what if you can't come back? Think of it like Ruby with Coma Girl. Sam gave Dean a doubtful look. Sam, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll leave enough juice to keep vitals going for a few hours, Dean said reassuringly. Just keep an eye on Jimmy. Dean slunk through the shadows looking for a decent meat suit. His search for Castile had been fruitless. The angel was nowhere on Earth. And as much as he liked the mangy crow he currently wore, he would need something human. He found one exiting a nearby nightclub drunk off her ass and followed closely by a couple of vampires. Well, Dean could do one good deed before using the poor girl. Maybe it would balance out his karma. He slipped into the girl as she stumbled around the corner. He leaned against the wall as he shifted the human's consciousness into sleep. "Hey sweetie, need some help?" said a smarmy voice as a hand rested on Dean's new arm. Dean craned his neck up to look at the two men. "If I were you, I'd start running." Or else he trailed off with a shrug. The two vampires laughed. "Or what?" one asked as he ran a finger up Dean's arm. "Y'all mace me?" Dean pushed off the wall and shifted his weight. And promptly fell on his ass. He glared up at the laughing vampires. They extended their teeth, grinning down at Dean. He was angry and embarrassed. As one leaned in, Dean reached up and grabbed him by the neck. He brought out his wings and let his power brush over the vampires. That would show them to laugh at him. What? Dean grinned as he drained the vampire of its life force. The white sparks were still there and Dean chose to ignore them. He had other things to worry about at that moment. What are you?" the second vampire asked as he backed away. Dean stood shakily. "Way out of your league," he replied. He quickly closed the distance between them and sapped the vampire. He let out a sigh as he reached out with his newly recharged power. He could risk going to heaven and he didn't want to deal with a whole group of angels. He needed to find one angel, preferably younger. One he could easily bully for information. He was about to try somewhere else when he felt the slightest trace of a familiar grace. "Oh yeah, will do nicely," he muttered to himself and took off. Anna stared out across the cityscape from her spot on the rooftop. Everything was so confusing. Between her time spent as a human and Uriel's betrayal, she was doubting herself and the rest of heaven. At least she managed to get Michael off her back for a little while. She wondered if the skills she learned leading her own garrison could translate to becoming an angelic bounty hunter. "Hello Anna," a woman's voice called from behind. Anna spun around. There were no other angels around. No demons either. She stared at the young woman who stood on the rooftop with her. She wore a short and clingy dress and her makeup looked to be smudged from rubbing at her eyes. Not what Anna would have expected a demon or angel to present themselves with. Cautiously she reached out with her grace but found nothing. As far as she could tell, the woman was human. She found thoughts on college, stress about money, exams, speeding tickets, just a normal human. "Do you like it?" the woman asked as she thrust out a hip and waved a hand over her form, her bracelets clinking together. "A bit short for my tastes. But I guess that's what the heels are for. Still relearning to walk in them. Don't let anyone lie to you, it's nothing like riding a bike." Anna frowned. "Who are you? What are you?" "Oh, that's right. We've never been properly introduced." "Probably before your time," the woman replied conversationally. Slowly red wings unfurled and a heavily corrupted grace caressed Anna's. The woman wore an unpleasant smile. "That's Raphael." Anna took a step back but still stood tall. "I'm not afraid of you." "Oh yeah? I killed your friend," she said as she pulled out her blade. "My friend?" Raphael repeated. She stared blankly at Anna. "Which one?" "I got lots of friends." "How many more angels are siding with Lucifer?" Anna questioned as she advanced on Raphael. Raphael stood her ground and raised her wings in warning. Anna stopped. A look of doubt drifting over her features. She was well trained. She knew she was good. She wasn't just handed her own garrison, she had earned it. But this was Raphael. Head of the Seraphim. Part of God's innermost circle. She had seen God. Anna had heard the rumors of how powerful she was. How much damage she had caused during the rebellion. She shifted into a defensive stance. "Now then. Which one?" Raphael glared at Anna. "Your recruiter Uriel," Anna bit out. Raphael let out a relieved laugh. "Oh, that's fine. I never liked him anyway." Anna frowned in confusion. "But..." Raphael sighed in irritation. "Just because I fell doesn't make me Lucifer's personal lackey. I'm not on his side. Not anymore." "Then whose side are you on?" Anna asked. She had to concentrate on keeping her eyes locked with Raphael's. It was so hard for her to keep from staring at the blood-red wings she had only heard whispers about. "My side," Raphael replied. "And whose side are you on, Anna? You're not exactly on good terms with heaven, are you? But you haven't been cut off either." Anna gave Raphael a hard glare. It was true. She wasn't entirely cut off. She could still feel heaven's pull. "Whatever it is you're planning, it'll have nothing to do with it. And I will stop you." Raphael laughed and rolled her eyes. "I'm not planning anything," he replied. "But I would like some information." "And you think he'll give it to you?" she scoffed. "With a little persuasion, yes. If you don't answer, I'm sure I could just ask the Winchesters. I'm sure Dean would be all over this pretty little thing. Who, or maybe their little guardian angel. Do you think Castile knows anything good?" Anna stiffened at the threat and pointed her weapon at Raphael. "You leave them alone." That's gonna be a little hard for me to do." "Shouldn't be too hard to find either. Just follow the path of destruction, right? Just think of all the fun games I could play with them. You think they like Mousetrap?" Anna charged at Raphael, but the fallen angel was fast. She was off and away with a peal of light laughter and Anna couldn't sense her any longer. Tracking down the human would be useless. She wasn't vessel material and Seraphiel would ditch her as soon as possible. Why was Seraphiel making herself known? She had been quiet for centuries. What could she possibly want now? Anna needed to warn Sam and Dean. Castiel had been dragged back to heaven so he was safe. From Seraphiel at least. Dean returned to his body to find Sam staring at him. He flinched back with a shout. Jesus fuck. Sam visibly relaxed as Dean sat up. Are you alright? He asked as he hovered over Dean half expecting to find fresh wounds. Dean looked over to Jimmy but found the other bed vacant. He looked back at Sam in confusion. Where's Jimmy? Sam's expression quickly changed to one of guilt. Get away. Dean raised his brow at Sam. He grabbed Sam's shoulder and pulled himself off the bed. With the physical contact he gently checked over Sam with his grace. The demonic taint in Sam's blood was fresh. Small but certainly fresh. He sighed as he stood. He stumbled as he took a step and Sam caught him. Are you okay? Sam asked in alarm. Dean pushed Sam off with a grunt. I'm fine. Just haven't been body snatching in a while. Hips and heels man. Sam frowned. That's a disturbing thought. Dean sighed as Sam radiated discomfort. Sorry. He popped his neck as he headed to the bathroom. He re-emerged with his toothbrush. Ugh. Was my mouth open the whole time? He grimaced at Sam's nod. He could feel Sam watching him warily. Waiting. He could do this. He could be calm. So Jimmy got away and where were you? He asked casually. Getting a Coke, Sam said. Dean turned from Sam and rolled his eyes. Why was Sam bothering to lie? Did he really think Dean wouldn't find out that he was still drinking demon blood? He sighed as he finished brushing his teeth. Well, let's get going. At least we know where Hess headed. I might've got us a lead, but we'll see if she pans out. Dean's mind was on Sam's demon blood addiction when Anna popped up in the back seat. He swerved the car and blushed deeply at being caught off guard. Anna? What are you doing here? He said, feigning ignorance. Anna opened her mouth in reply, but quickly shut it as she turned her gaze on Sam. Sam, you feel different. Out of the corner of his eye Dean saw Sam shift uncomfortably. I don't know why. Anna frowned as she returned her attention to Dean. Have you guys encountered any unusual? She asked. In a vague Anna, Dean pointed out. Here's an angel. A fallen angel named Seraphiel. She approached me last night and expressed interest in you too. Well, she can get in line, Dean said before Sam could say anything, keeping Anna's attention away from Sam's reaction. No, Dean, Anna pleaded. Shush, bad news. She sided with Lucifer during the rebellion. When she was banished she set up shop on Earth and caused a lot of damage. She caused the Black Death. What? Sam exclaimed and stared at Dean. Dean shrunk a little and kept his eyes on the road ahead. He hadn't meant for it to happen. It was supposed to hit one village, but things had gotten a little out of hand. He cleared his throat and kept his voice level as he spoke. So what did she want? I don't know, she replied. What do you think she wanted? Anna sighed. The other angels are being very careful of what they say, but I can tell something big is about to happen. Essentially Earth is Seraphiel's turf. She probably noticed the increase in angel activity and wants to know what's going on. Aren't we all? Dean commented. So Anna turned out to be a dead end. Maybe she at least had an idea as to what had happened to Castiel. So do you know what happened to Kaz? He was dragged back to heaven. Dean tried not to wince. Do you know why? Did he say anything to you? Anna shook her head. I was hoping you knew something, she admitted. Dean sighed in annoyance. No, and Jimmy doesn't remember anything. Nothing important. Jimmy? Pass vessel, Sam replied. Anna nodded and glanced around the backseat. Where is he now? Sam looked away uneasily. He hugged away. What? Don't worry, Dean reassured her. We know where he is. We're on our way right now. Anna huffed and left without a word. Dean held up a hand silencing Sam. Once Anna was out of range he nodded. He went after Anna. Dean shrugged. She was close by and I figured she'd be easy, he replied. She doesn't suspect anything, does she? I mean, what happens when someone finds out about you? Dean bit his lip. He didn't want Sam to know about the whole True Vessel thing. If they could keep Lucifer locked up it won't be an issue. There's not much they can do to me. Someone might be very upset though, he admitted. He flashed Sam a shit-eating grin. But like I said, there's not much they can do about it. And I can always blame Dad. Hess the one that let me get away with all this. Right, saw Seraphiel's a girl now. Last night's vessel was. Cute lady. Expensive taste in shoes. Part of Sam wished had never found out. He still had his brother. Dean would always be his brother. But Seraphiel, what was Sam to the angel? Was Dean just playing a part? Dean had to have lived for eons. What was one human lifetime to him? How much could one human mean to him? Sam shook the thoughts from his mind. He had read Chuck's rendition of what had happened the night Sam had found out about Seraphiel. He had read about the loss Dean had felt from Sam's reaction. Dean was still the same overprotective self-loathing jerk he had grown up with. The only real difference now was that he knew the reasoning behind some of the self-loathing. Sam and Dean barely made it in time to save Jimmy and his family. As Dean watched Jimmy's wife approach the car, he cursed himself for not taking care of the demon when he had the chance. He could just gank the demon right there. Knife or smite her. It won't matter either way. Jimmy would probably hate him for it, and then there would be no way that the human would cooperate. He couldn't say anything either. He would have to bide his time and hope for the best. When they left the demon and Jimmy's daughter behind, he finally spoke. "Sorry to say this, Jimmy, but your wife's possessed," he said. "What? You're lying. How can you tell?" Jimmy shouted from the backseat. Dean grimaced and bit his lip. How much should he say? "Well, I know how Sam can sorta control demons. I can sense them," he replied. For someone out of the loop it would seem plausible. "Then why did you leave them there? You left my daughter back there with a demon. We have to go back." Jimmy tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. He tried the lock, but the door still remained in place. "Let me out." Dean slowed the car and eventually stopped. "I'm keeping track of her," he said distractedly. "The further away we get the harder it is, so do me a favor and shut up." "What? So follow them. Get them back," Jimmy demanded as he grabbed for Dean. Dean easily grabbed Jimmy's hand and held it in place. "Look, they want you. They want whatever information you have, and when they find out that you know jack shit, then they'll slowly cut you apart to find out what makes you tick," he explained. "They're gonna use your family as bait. We wait for them to contact you. But they don't know that we know your wife's possessed. They don't know that we can follow them. We have the upper hand right now." "Dean's right," Sam said. "This is the safest route for your family." "How do you know that?" Jimmy wailed as he slumped against the backseat. "I know how demons work," Dean replied. "They'll use your family to lure you in, then when they have you they'll kill your family in front of you." Jimmy stared at Dean in shock. "You say that as if it's a good thing," he said numbly. Dean sighed as he pulled the car back onto the road. "When dealing with demons, yes. It is a good thing. They want you to suffer, and the best way to do that is to take what you love. If they did it out of sight it just won't mean as much. You won't have had any chance of saving them. Oh, there may be some guilt, but nothing compared to if you were actually there. If you were just a little stronger. If you could have said the right thing, they want that shit going through your head. They want you to feel more than helpless." Dean caught Sam's expression out of the corner of his eye. He gave his brother a quick glance trying to decipher what it meant. Pity for sympathy, he quickly looked away and renewed his focus on the demon he was tracking. "Like I said, I know how demons work." They waited several blocks away from the abandoned building that Dean had followed the demon to. When Sam's phone rang, Dean reminded Jimmy that he needed to act as if he knew nothing. Jimmy nodded jerkily as he took the phone. He didn't have to pretend for very long. When Jimmy hung up the phone, he looked up at Dean with a lost expression. There. They're alive for now. I am supposed to go alone." "Don't worry. We'll be there," Sam said reassuringly. "You go in the front door and we'll sneak in." Jimmy stared at the phone in his hands. What if something goes wrong? What if? Dean clapped a hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "I won't let them die," he promised. Jimmy looked into Dean's eyes and swallowed. All right." Dean snuck along the length of the building looking for his prey. When he caught sight of a demon patrolling the side entrance, he readied himself. He really didn't want to, but he needed the extra energy. It had been so long since he had absorbed a demon's essence. He exhaled and swiftly ran up behind the demon and placed his hand on the back of its head. He fell to his knees as the dark energies racked through his grace. When he regained his composure, his senses automatically homed in on another demon just inside the door. One more won't hurt. When Dean finally joined the party, he staggered into the main room, expecting to find everything perfectly fine. What he found was Jimmy lying in the dirt and bleeding out, Sam drinking the blood of a demon, and Castiel in the body of a little girl. He leaned against the wall as he cocked his head to the side. He hadn't taken that long, had he? Just a couple demons. Maybe more than a couple. He noticed Jimmy's wife approaching Sam and pushed himself off the wall. He let his power wash over the beings in the room. He flaunted his wings as all eyes turned to him. He sauntered up to one of the demons, too shocked to move. "Hi there," he slurred. "The demon angel." The demon whispered as he took a step back. Dean's smirk turned to an ugly frown. He narrowed his eyes at the demon. "Don't call me that," he hissed and slammed his hand against the demon's forehead. The demon screamed in agony before Dean let it die. He looked up from the corpse to find Castiel staring in disapproval. He quickly looked away. "Sorry. Let's just end this," said Castiel as he reached out to smite the demon next to him. Dean found it off-putting to watch a little girl take down a demon more than twice her size. He heard Sam shout his name and turned to see Jimmy's wife just behind him with a knife in her hand. She was frozen to the spot with thick black smoke slowly pouring from her mouth. Dean sobered slightly from his demon binge. This was more than the exorcism he had witnessed Sam perform. This was a demon dying. Sam was able to kill demons with his mind. He stared up at Sam in shock. When Sam finished, Dean was vaguely aware of Castiel addressing Jimmy. It wasn't until he felt Castiel transfer his grace that he looked to the other angel. Jimmy's wife ran up to her daughter and protectively took her child in her arms. Castiel stepped around the mother and daughter completely unaware of their stares. Dean said with a slight smile. He reached up to touch Castiel but stopped at Castiel's glare. Cause. What happened? I learned my lesson while I was away, Dean Castiel harshly replied. I serve heaven. I don't serve man, and I certainly don't serve you. Dean blinked in confusion. He tentatively ran his grace over Castiel's and found flecks of anger and hatred burning brightly. He quickly pulled back and shut everything out. He stared at the ground, breathing heavily and missing the sad look Castiel gave him. I will say this. Thank you. For at least trying, though you did fall short in the end, Castiel said as he moved to walk past Dean. Dean felt Castiel leave. He was having trouble breathing. It shouldn't matter to him. Everything was as it should be. Seraphiel ever the screw-up, abandoned by his father and hated by all of heaven. It shouldn't matter what Castiel thought of him, but it did. Even if it was pointless, he sent a silent prayer to his father asking for some guidance. Sam tried to console Dean, but Dean's eyes never left the blood drying on his lips. Dean sighed. He knew Sam meant well. Hell, Dean had meant well plenty of times, but that didn't make him right. He mentally went over his current situation. Castiel was safe. Hated Dean, but at least he was alive. Dean could devote his attention to Sam. And Sam needed to be stopped. When Sam and Dean entered their motel room, Dean threw himself onto one of the beds with a groan. Dean? Sam sat on the other bed and watched Dean. Dean had been silent since Castiel had left. What? Are ya okay? Dean stared at the ceiling. He wasn't okay. Castiel hated him. Sam was drinking demon blood and Dean was high as fuck on demonic energy. He could feel the corruption seeping through his grace. He wanted more. He'd have to suffer through withdrawal. Again. It hadn't been fun the first time, but at least he didn't have centuries of addiction behind him this time around. He glanced at Sam. He could worry about it later. Right now Sam needed to be stopped before it was too late. There was still a bit of blood staining Sam's shirt. "I'm fine, Sammy." He sighed as he sat up. He stood and headed toward the door. "Where are you going?" Sam asked as he got up. Dean stopped short of the door and faced Sam. He contemplated not telling Sam some of what was going on, but Sam needed to know. To understand just how bad the demon blood was. He sighed heavily and looked away. "I sapped a few demons tonight," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much I want to hunt one down right now, and just I want to torture them, get their fear so high that I can taste it as I consume them, and not just demon Sammy. Anything." He looked back to see Sam's worried expression. "I gotta burn off some of this shit before I actually do something I'll regret." Sam nodded and sat back down. "Just careful." Dean nodded before vanishing. "Hey Bobby." Bobby dropped the armful of books he had been carrying and spun to face the intruder. "Dean, ya you idiot angel." He stalked up to Dean, fully prepared to punch him. "Use the damn door." Dean stepped back and raised his hands. "Sorry. But this is kind of an emergency." Bobby narrowed his eyes at Dean. "What sort of emergency?" he asked. Dean looked away. "It's Sam. Something happened to him." Bobby looked at Dean in concern, placing a hand on Dean's shoulder. "Not yet, Hess been drinking demon blood and it's getting worse." I think Hess addicted," Dean said quietly. "Addicted to demon blood?" Bobby shouted. "How the hell did he manage that?" "Doesn't take much," Dean replied. "I'm ridden a damn good high of demon energy myself right now. Only reason I'm able to keep it together is the thought of Sammy." Bobby nodded. "So what do we do?" he asked. "The panic room needs to be prepped," Dean said, rubbing at his neck. "He needs to get it out of his system. Cold turkey's the best way." "Alright, I'll get the panic room ready for Sam. Anything else?" "Panic room's already taken care of," Dean commented distractedly. "What?" Dean shrugged. "I got a lot of energy to burn right now." He looked at Bobby in worry. "I just need you to call Sam tomorrow morning. Tell him you found something big. Anything. Just give us an excuse to be here. And if he doesn't believe me?" "He'll believe you," Dean assured. "That's why you have to give him a reason to be here." Dean's plan worked like a charm. He and Bobby sat in the study in silence. "How long do you think this'll take?" Bobby asked. Dean shrugged. He was already feeling the effects of his own withdrawal. "You okay there, boy?" Dean shook his head. "I really want to let Sam out, let him drink all the blood he wants, then drain his victim myself," he muttered. Bobby inhaled sharply at the admission. "Do I need to lock you up too?" Dean looked up at Bobby. "Nah. I've done this before. Sucks, but I can get through it. Is there I dunno demon Nicorette or something?" Dean laughed as he leaned back. I guess I could load up on ghosts and vamps and stuff. Then why don't ya? Bobby asked. Dean bit his lip. Ghosts leave menacingly high. Everything else, well, someone would notice if a bunch of monsters went missing. And it would take a hell of a lot of them to make up for one demon. Right. So no Nicorette. Dean shook his head and smiled. No Nicorette, no patch, no nothing. Sam stared at the ceiling. He knew he was hallucinating. He tried to ignore the visions, but they kept coming, kept saying the right things, the things that hurt him most. He turned his head away from the latest one to find Dean leaning against the door. Dean. Dean cocked his head to the side as he regarded Sam. You're so helpless, Sammy. All of you are really. Sam frowned as Dean pushed off the door and came closer. You humans, you have no power. No ability to help yourselves, Dean said, and kneeled next to Sam. He stroked Sam's cheek almost lovingly. That's why you couldn't save her. Poor Jess. Dean shook his head mournfully. I suppose I could have saved her, but she was only human. Nothing special. Nothing worth saving. Even your mother. Sweet beautiful Mary. Dead. Could have saved her. Could have let you grow up with a normal life. Didn't. Dean grinned at Sam. Such a long list, isn't it? All the ones I could have saved but didn't bother with. How many hunts did we go on where there could have been no casualties? If I had just said one word. Sam blinked and looked away. It wasn't Dean. I couldn't be Dean. You had your reason, Sam spat out. Dean nodded. Yes, selfish really. What's one human life compared to me not being found out? Dean looked away and thought. Well, more like a couple hundred, but hey. No one knows. That's a good thing, right? Sam closed his eyes tightly. You wanna know the real reason I've got you locked up? Dean leaned closer. I like you powerless. I like being the one in charge. I may not be able to command the armies of heaven anymore, but I sure as hell can push a few humans around. That's why I need you off the demon blood, Sammy. I don't do well with competition. You're not real. Maybe not. But you know it's true. Just wait until Bobby's no longer useful. Should I just let him die or should I kill him myself? Dean asked. No, save everyone the trouble. Dean pressed his forehead against the fridge. One demon, just one. Not two or three. Just enough to tide him over until Sam was better. He groaned lowly as his grace hummed for more. He spread his wings, casting shadows about the kitchen. No. He could do this. He could last a little longer. Why couldn't he stop at just one? He giggled to himself. You can never stop at just one, he mumbled. What's that? Bobby asked as he entered the kitchen. Dean didn't bother moving from his position. Demons. Fucking potato chips of the supernatural world. Bobby slowly approached Dean. Sam's at another lull. I'm gonna get some chips, Dean declared, straightening. Dean. I'm not gonna eat a fucking demon, Bobby, Dean said, facing Bobby. But I need some sort of ice right now. I'm getting chips, pie, beer, pretzels, dip and some cookie dough. Bobby stared at Dean. I could go get it, he offered. It'll be fine. There's no demons around and I can make it to the store quicker than you. Bobby huffed but backed off. Fine. But be quick about it. Dean nodded happily and took off for the nearest convenience store. Dean landed behind the convenience store with a small stumble. He tucked his wings away and straightened his coat self-consciously. He rounded the corner and froze. He could feel a demon lurking nearby. No. He was here for junk food, not junk food. He braced himself against the wall, feeling the demon coming closer. He was better than this. He could get past this. He could. Winchester, the demon growled as he showed up behind Dean. Dean clenched his eyes shut, trying to ignore the pulsating want running through his grace. He dragged his nails against a brick wall. Fuck off. The demon laughed as he approached Dean. Where's baby brother? He asked. Dean rounded on the demon and slammed his hand against its chest. Not here. He had meant to kill it, but he had drained it greedily, enjoying the fresh spike of darkness. He pulled his hand back in shock. Shit. He quickly looked around and cast his senses about to see if there was anything else in the area. Nothing. Not even an evil termite. He shuddered as he tried to take a calming breath. He should have gone somewhere else. Of course there would be demons camping out at the places the Winchesters frequented. Why couldn't he think straight? He punched at the wall in frustration. He should have just left when he had first sensed the demon. He looked down at the corpse and waved his hand. The body quickly dissolved into dust. This was okay. It was just a minor setback. One little demon. Nothing big. Nothing to worry about. Chips. He had to get chips. Dean hurried into the store and filled a basket with chips and pie. After making his purchase, he stood outside and stared at the sky. Why do you hate me so much? He asked. Why would you let that happen? He kicked at the ground before heading out of sight. He extended his wings and almost took off, but he felt an angel closing in on him. He growled in frustration. He just couldn't catch a break, could he? He quickly hit his wings and backed against the wall. He hoped they hadn't sensed him. Castiel appeared in front of Dean. Dean averted his eyes, not wanting to face Castiel after what he had just done. "What do you want, Castiel?" he asked quietly. He wanted desperately to touch Castiel's grace, but refrained. Castiel stared at Dean. He reached out to Dean's grace, but Dean avoided him. "We need you to swear yourself to heaven," he eventually replied. Dean glanced up at Castiel with narrowed eyes. "Me? Why? You're the one to end this." "What? Kill Lilith?" he asked with an incredulous laugh. "Stop her from summoning up Lucifer?" Castiel's expression did not change. "Why me, huh? Sammy can kill demons with his power now," Dean said. "Why not have him do it? The amount of blood required for him to kill Lilith would change your brother forever," Dean Castiel replied. Dean nodded. "Figures. He'd turn out like me, right?" Castiel looked at Dean sadly. "Possibly worse," he admitted. Dean closed his eyes and breathed slowly. "There's no reason this would have to come to pass," Dean Castiel said. "We believe it's you, Dean. Not your brother. The only question for us is whether you're willing to accept it. Stand up and accept your role. You're the one who will stop it." Dean slowly looked at Castiel. "So it's either Sam or me? If I do this, Sammy doesn't have to. If it gives you comfort to see it that way." Dean leaned his head back against the wall. A silent prayer to God for guidance went unanswered. "Fine. I'm in. But you give yourself wholly to the service of God and his angels." Dean scoffed and smiled grimly. "Yeah, exactly. Say it," Castiel softly demanded. Dean frowned and stared at Castiel in confusion. He had trouble reading Castiel's expression. Anticipation. Worry. "Fear. I give myself over wholly to serve God and you," he said. He didn't know exactly what he was signing up for, but he was going to buy himself as much wiggle room as possible. He knew too many demons to just agree to whatever. "You swear to follow his will and his word as swiftly and obediently as you did your own father's?" Dean stiffened. Why would Castiel phrase it that way? It was a script. Castiel was working off a fucking script. He narrowed his eyes and glared. "Yes," he replied. If Castiel was going to act like that, play the part of the obedient angel, then he'd play his own part. Not that it would matter. It would be hard to follow the will of a missing person. "I swear." Castiel nodded slightly at Dean, the sadness more than evident in his eyes. "Now what?" Dean asked. "Now you wait," Castiel replied. "And we call on you when it's time." Dean looked at the ground. What had he just agreed to? When he looked back up, Castiel was gone. He breathed deeply before he flew back to Bobby's. Dean slowed and landed just outside the house. He was about to bang on the door and proudly proclaim he could follow rules, but something wasn't right. He scanned everything but still couldn't place what was off. It was as if a powerful being had just been there, but had covered their tracks thoroughly. Dean carefully opened the door and quietly entered. He looked around the entryway, not finding anything that would give him a clue. "Bobby?" he called out, fearing the worst. There was no answer. He combed the immediate area with his senses. He felt one human presence around the back of the house. He then reached out for the basement. It was empty. No, he dropped the store bag to the floor and ran downstairs. Nothing. The door was wide open and the devil's traps were broken. Dean stopped and stared at the open door. "How? Who?" "Bobby." He rushed back up the stairs and out the back door. He found Bobby unconscious on the ground. "Bobby." He shook the older man and sent a soft burst of the cleanest energy he could manage into Bobby. Just enough to wake him up. A soft spark of glittering white danced along Bobby's temple. "What? Sam's gone. What happened?" "He got out somehow," Bobby grumbled as Dean helped him up. "Tried to make him stay, but he rammed my gun into my head." He hissed as he touched the growing bruise. "Something busted up the devil's traps," Dean said. "Demons?" Bobby asked. "Probably Ruby," Dean bit out in disgust. "How'd she touch the door?" Dean shrugged. Whatever had happened, they had waited for Dean to leave. He shouldn't have left. Draining the demon was bad enough, but losing Sam? "I have to find him." Bobby eyed the rattling windows of the nearby junkers. "Boy, you need to calm down." "Calm down? Sammy's hooked on fucking demon blood and missing, and you want me to calm down?" Bobby slapped Dean. "Yes." Dean stepped back and stared at Bobby. "Did you just slap me?" he asked in disbelief. "And it'll do it again if you don't calm down this instant." Dean let out a small laugh and shook his head. "Now then. Where do you think Sam headed?" Bobby asked. Castiel stared out at the city lights from his position on the rooftop. Why was he doing this? He wanted to tell Dean everything that was going on, but he couldn't. He had promised. He had promised Dean that he would remain in heaven. To not fall. He closed his eyes as he waited. He opened them when he felt Anna's arrival. He slowly turned to face her. "What did you do?" she asked. "You shouldn't have come," Anna Castiel replied. Part of him hoped she would get the hint and leave. "Why would you let out Sam Winchester?" "Those were my orders." "Orders?" Cass, you saw him, she said, her voice urgent. Hess drinking demon blood. It's so much worse than we thought. Dean was trying to stop him. Castiel looked away as two angels appeared behind Anna. You really shouldn't have come. Anna gasped as she was detained. She gave Castiel one last plea along her grace before she was dragged away. Castiel watched in silence, then turned back to the cityscape. He had promised. But was it worth it? They had found a lead on Sam's location. Dean pulled up to the hotel, then parked a few blocks away. He flew to the hotel and landed in the parking lot. He had managed to stick the landing, but couldn't afford to celebrate. There were a few demons lingering around the premises. Well, he was already having a shit week, he may as well make it worse. He made quick work of the demons sucking up their lives and enjoying every bit of it. After he had finished, he made his way toward the room with a demon and a human. The door opened and he hid behind the corner. Sam had left the room, leaving Ruby. Dean grinned to himself. Well, this was going to be easy. He pulled out the demon knife and quietly opened the door. He slowly edged toward Ruby, knife raised. Ruby heard a noise and turned, expecting to find Sam. She raised her arm just in time to deflect the knife. Her eyes caught the blood-red wings behind Dean. Were on the same side. Lilith, she pleaded, narrowly missing another blow from the knife. Seraphiel. Please, we can work together. What makes you think I'm on your side, you fucking bitch? Dean jumped at Ruby. He quickly overpowered her and grinned as he raised the knife. No. Let her go. Sam shouted as he pulled Dean away and took the knife. He shoved Dean away and Dean caught himself on the bed. Just take it easy. He cocked his head to the side as he stared at his brother, a confused frown forming. Sam, Ruby said, grabbing Sam's sleeve. That's not Dean. Her eyes flicked at Dean as she hid behind Sam. Sam glanced at Ruby in confusion. What? Dean held out his arms. Seraphiel, he announced, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. At your service. Sam looked back at Dean. Why are you here? It's obvious, isn't it? I'm here to gank that bitch, Dean replied, pointing at Ruby. Ruby, Sam said, pushing her back slightly. Get out of here. She's not going anywhere. Dean shouted as he stepped forward. He stared at Sam, unable to grasp how lowly demon had managed to gain his brother's trust so easily. Ruby saw her chance and fled while Seraphiel was distracted. She's poisoned Sam. Dean cried out. It's not what you think, Dean, Sam replied. Look what she did to you. Dean pleaded. She up and vanishes weeks at a time, leaving you cracking out for another hit. She was looking for Lilith. Dean shook his head. That's French for manipulating your ass 10 ways from Sunday. I'm damned certain she knew where Lilith was the whole time. You're wrong, Dean, Sam insisted. Sam, you're lying to yourself, Dean said, shaking his head. I just want you to be okay. You would do the same for me. You know you would. Just listen. Sam tossed the knife he held onto the bed, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Just listen for a second. We got a lead on a demon close to Lilith. Come with us, Dean. We'll do this together. That sounds great. As long as it's you and me. Demon bitch is a deal breaker. You kiss her goodbye, we can go right now. Tell you what. You drink her blood, it'll sap her dry, Dean suggested. It scared him how much he was willing to carry out that statement. I can't, Sam said quietly. Dean, I need her to help me kill Lilith. Dean turned away. Why couldn't Sam see it? Why couldn't he understand? I know you can't wrap your head around it, Sam said, breaking off Dean's thoughts. But maybe one day I'll understand. I'm the only one who can do this, Dean. Dean stopped and turned to face Sam. No, he replied, you're not the one who's gonna do this. Right. That's right. I forgot, Sam replied patronizingly. The angels think it's you. You're going to end the apocalypse all by yourself. You don't think I can? No. You can't. You're not strong enough. Dean bristled. What makes you think I'm not strong enough? Please, you couldn't handle Alistair. What makes you think you can take care of Lilith? Sam asked. And who the hell are you? Dean snapped. I'm being practical here, Sam calmly replied. I'm doing what needs to be done. Yeah? You're not gonna do a single damn thing. Stop bossing me around, Dean. Sam took a calming breath. Look. My whole life you take the wheel, you call the shots. And I trust you because you're my brother. Now I am asking you for answer, trust me. He stared pleadingly at Dean. No. You don't know what you're doing, Sam, Dean said. Yes I do. Sam insisted. Then that's worse. Why? Look, I'm telling you. Because it's not something that you're doing. Dean pointed out. If you actually know what you're doing, then it's what you are. It means Dean trailed off. His heart broke for Sam. He had been there. He still was there, corrupted, addicted, thinking he knew what was best. What? Sam prompted. No. Say it. It means you're a monster, Dean quietly replied. He didn't get the chance to add like me before Sam punched him hard. Dean stumbled back. The backs of his knees hit the bed and he lost his footing and fell to the floor. Dean slowly stood, giving Sam an even stare. He punched Sam back. Sam grabbed at Dean and threw him through a decorative wall. He stared down at Dean in anger. He licked his lips and raised his hand as he concentrated. Dean writhed in pain on the floor. He shifted his energies around, attempting to dart out from Sam's control, but there were too many demons running fresh in his grace. Sam had grunted at the effort it took. He finally let up as Dean let out a broken sob. "You're not my brother," Sam hissed. "You don't know me. You never did. And you never will." He gave Dean one final look before heading for the door. Dean gasped for air, helpless to stop Sam. "You walk out that door, don't you ever come back." Sam paused. Dean felt relief. It was quickly replaced by absolute despair as Sam opened the door and left. They were getting closer to finding Lilith. They already had the demon that would lead them to Lilith's location in their grasp, so it was only a matter of time. Sam paced back and forth. He deeply regretted what he had done. Using his power on Dean, leaving him broken and alone. But he had to. He was protecting Dean. Keeping him on the right track. Keeping the temptation of Lucifer away. He had already seen Dean slip, munching on demons and their energy, and already feeling like the demons they hunted. He knew Dean would do the same for him. Was actually trying to do the same. But Lucifer, Dean was a fool if he thought he managed to keep the longing out of his voice whenever he spoke of the fallen angel. What Sam was doing was right. Dean had already done so much for him, protected him from so much. It was time Sam returned the favor. He sighed as he entered the house he and Ruby had holed up in. He wondered if the way Dean had felt under his power would be similar to Lilith. The constant fluctuating dark energy zipping by and hard to grasp. He reminded himself he was doing this for Dean. Dean sat on the floor where Sam had left him. He hadn't moved from the spot. He stared ahead, not sure of what to do. He had told Sam to never come back. Sam hated him. Sam was right. They weren't brothers. No matter how much he believed it, how much he wished it, he was Seraphiel, not Dean. He glanced up when he felt Castiel's approach. He sighed and tucked his wings away and hid his grace. He stared up miserably at Castiel when the angel appeared. Castiel's breath caught at the sight of Dean. "Dean." Dean looked away. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. He closed his eyes and steadied his breathing as he felt himself being transported. When he opened them, he found himself in an ornately decorated room. He slowly pulled himself up and looked around. There was so much angelic power he could almost pretend he was in heaven, but it was all fake. "It's almost time," Castiel said before vanishing. Dean stared at the floor. Time for what? For him to face Lilith. To be properly punished because he couldn't stop Sam. For God to finally end his suffering. He prayed for the last. He wanted it to all be over with. He glanced at the table in the center of the room as a wave of power pulsed through. A platter piled high with burgers and a bowl of chilled beers had appeared. He reached out and picked up a beer, examining the label. It was one of his favorites. They were trying to win his favor. Was this a last meal? Were they expecting him to die? "Hello, Dean," an unfamiliar voice greeted. "You're looking fit." Dean turned to face the pair of angels that had appeared. He recognized Zachariah's wings. Dean took a step back, fear creeping up his spine. Zachariah had been right in front during his banishment. One of the ones to rip into his wings. His wings throbbed from the reminder. What is this?" Dean asked, trying to remain calm. "Where the hell am I?" "Call it a green room," Zachariah replied as he walked up to Dean. "We're closing in on the grand finale here. We want to keep you safe before showtime." Dean stared at Zachariah, forcing himself to stand his ground. He felt his stomach turn as Zachariah offered a burger. When he claimed he wasn't hungry, the angel tried to appease him with television characters. Dean didn't know what to think. They were trying to keep him safe. Safe from what? "Now I want to know what the game plan is," he said. "Let us worry about that," Zachariah replied. "We want you," Faki said, relaxed. "Well, I'm about to be pissed and leaving, so start talking," Chuckles, Dean said. He was having trouble looking at Zachariah. Every time he caught sight of Zachariah's wings, he got another flash of the angel looming over him, gleefully tearing into his wings. Zachariah explained how the seal had fallen, and when Dean replied with his default sarcasm, Zachariah rounded on him and aimed low, pointing out how Dean had started it all. Dean looked away. He had done more than started. It went back much further than that. He probably could have stopped it all. Stopped Lucifer from rebelling, stopped his fall. He tuned back in as Zachariah explained how Lilith would be the one to break the final seal. He couldn't believe that the angels had no idea where it would happen. They knew when. Why not where? If he was supposed to stop her, then why weren't they telling him anything? He glared when Zachariah told him to have faith. His anger spiked at those words. "What in you?" he scoffed. "Give me one good reason why I should." "Because you swore your obedience," Zachariah replied as he closed in on Dean. "So obey." Dean looked past Zachariah at Castiel. He frowned as Castiel looked away, unable to meet his eyes. He looked back at Zachariah before turning away. He felt the angels leave and breathed a sigh of relief. He was proud of himself for not completely breaking down into a quivering mess in the corner like he had wanted to. He paced the room wondering what he should do. Clearly Castiel had yet to say anything to his superiors about Seraphiel. For that Dean was thankful. But why? He sighed as he pulled out his phone. He had a signal. That was a good sign. Maybe he could get hold of Sam. See if he could get Sam to back off. To at least wait until there was more to go on. The moment he began speaking he could feel it. Angelic power tampering with his message. He continued regardless, not wanting to give himself away. He sighed as he hung up the phone. Sam would never get his message. He was on lockdown. He eyed the door for a moment knowing it would be useless to try. He spent his time pacing back and forth wondering what Sam was doing. Where he was. What sort of lies Ruby was spouting into his ear. He was having trouble telling how much time had passed. He was angry. Annoyed. Bored. He walked up to a small statuette of a pretty angel. As he tipped it over he could think of one pretty angel head like to push off the side of a building. The shattered figure brought him a small bit of satisfaction. Castiel appeared behind Dean. "You asked to see me?" he said looking at the remnants of the statuette. He looked up in time to see Dean roll his eyes. Dean stuttered. He hadn't expected Castiel to show up because of his thoughts. But since Castiel was there he may as well see if he could get some use out of the angel. "Yeah, listen, I need something." "Anything you wish." Dean's heart and hope rose at the words. Had Castiel changed his mind? Was he going to help Dean? "I need you to take me to see Sam." "Why?" "Here's something I gotta talk to him about," Dean replied. "What's that?" Dean's hopes crashed. Castiel wasn't there to help him. "The BM I took this morning," he sarcastically lashed out. "What's it to you? Just make it snappy." "I don't think that's wise," Castiel replied as he looked around uncomfortably. "Well, I didn't ask for your opinion," Dean growled. He could always just leave. He didn't need Castiel's help. He could eventually track Sam down. Castiel must have known what was going through Dean's head, for he shook his head slightly. "Have you forgotten what happened the last time you met?" "No. That's the whole point," Dean pleaded. He desperately wanted Castiel back on his side. By his side. "Listen, I'm gonna do whatever you mooks want, okay? I just need to tie up this one thing. 5 minutes. That's all I need." "No." Dean paused. "What do you mean no? Are you saying that I'm trapped here?" he asked. He knew the answer. He just wanted to hear Castiel say it. "You can go wherever you want." Dean glared at Castiel. "Super. I want to go see Sam." "Except there," Castiel said in frustration. "I want to take a walk." "Fine. He'll go with you." "Alone?" "No." "You know what?" Dean said as he threw a final glare at Castiel. "Screw this noise. I'm out of here." He walked past Castiel and could already feel the pulse of energy warping the room. "Through what door?" Dean sighed as the door melted into the wall, leaving behind a small table, and signed in resignation as Castiel left the room. He knew it would happen. He knew they weren't going to let him leave. But he had to show them. Show them that he won't just roll over. And he could feel he was being watched. If he were to leave, then it would all be over. He could feel just how many angels were stationed right outside the room. He knew he could outfly them. At least for a short time before his wings gave out. With only 2 wings he wasn't as good as he used to be. He wondered if he would be able to zip past and get far enough to evade detection. He did a quick sweep and sighed heavily. There were too many. And they were on high alert. He glanced around the room and caught sight of one of the heavy candlesticks. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. He popped the candle off, imagining what it would be like to bash in Zachariah's skull. He eyed one of the walls. If they wanted stupid human, then he'd give them stupid human. He raised the candlestick and brought it down against the wall. A few hits and he had made a sizable dent. He was surprised they had actually let him get that far. He halted mid-stroke as the wall healed. He felt Zachariah's return. He dropped the candlestick to the floor. "Son of a bitch. Quit flinging feces like a howler monkey, would you?" "It's unbecoming," Zachariah said. Dean couldn't stand the smug look on Zachariah's face. "Let me out of here," he ground out as he advanced on the angel. "Like I told you. Too dangerous out there," Zachariah replied. "Demons on the prowl." "I've been getting my ass kicked all year," Dean pointed out. "It wasn't about his safety. Now you're sweating my safety. You're lying. I want to see my brother." Zachariah's smug smile never left his face. "That's ill-advised." Dean growled in frustration. Why did everyone have to beat around the bush? Why couldn't they just come out and say what they were planning? "You know, I am so sick of your crap riddles and your smug fat face. What the hell is going on, huh? Why can't I see Sam? And how am I gonna ice Lilith?" he questioned. "You're not," Zachariah replied, "going to ice Lilith." "What?" Dean's eyes narrowed. If the plan wasn't for him to stop Lilith and the apocalypse, he felt his stomach drop as Zachariah told him what would happen. How Lilith would break the seal. Why would heaven let the apocalypse happen? Why would God let it happen? He had to grab the table for support. Zachariah had to be wrong. God won't let it happen. Won't let his beloved creation suffer something so devastating. He pointed out Sam was still out there. That he could stop Lilith. The look Zachariah gave him made him sick to his stomach. He listened as Zachariah spoke of him having a destiny being chosen. Dean could tell where the conversation was going. Surely God wouldn't have let it gone this far. So far that Lucifer and Michael would actually need their vessels. Not after Dean had swiped Michael's vessel. There was no vessel. An angel needed permission. A corpse cold give permission. Even if Dean left the vessel, Michael won't be able to possess it. It was far too late to shove a soul in it. And even if Dean gave his permission, an angel could possess another angel. Zachariah hadn't said anything about vessels just yet, but Dean knew. Tell me something, he said, watching Zachariah saunter away. He had to know. Where's God in all this? God? Zachariah repeated. God has left the building. Dean stared in shock. He felt no deceit coming from Zachariah, no tells from his wings. Dean barely managed to stumble into a chair. God was gone. Pastiel appeared in the room. He was surprised to find Dean sitting at the table. Dean, he tilted his head and took in what he saw. Dean sat slumped in the chair, body completely relaxed and staring ahead. He approached Dean and lightly touched his shoulder. Dean. When Dean gave no reaction, Castiel reached out with his grace, trying to seek out Dean. He could feel him barely. Dean was devastated, lost. Castiel tried to go deeper but was shut out. Dean looked up as Castiel expressionless. Go away, he said, then looked away. Dean. Dean shook his head. It doesn't matter. Can't you see it's all over? Everything's all fucked up and it's my fault. I've killed us all and God's not here to fix it this time. Castiel stared at Dean. He didn't know what he could say. What he could do. Just go. Please, Dean whispered, closing his eyes. Castiel nodded and left. He stood just outside the room. Looking around at his brothers and sisters that stood guard, he wondered why he was doing it. Why he was going along with the orders. God was missing. Was what they were doing right? Dean had looked so broken. More so than how Castiel had found him at the hotel. He sighed, unsure of what to do. He wanted to help Dean. Help him to stop the apocalypse. But if he were to do that, then he would be breaking his promise to Dean. He closed his eyes as he turned away from the room. Maybe some promises were meant to be broken. He glanced up as one of his brothers passed in front of him. A plan was forming in his mind and his survival looked dim. But hopefully Sam and Dean would come out on top. He hoped Dean would forgive him. Castiel waited. He didn't want his brothers and sisters to suspect anything. Not until it was too late. Once he felt enough time had passed, he casually re-entered the room. Dean was in the same position he had left him. Castiel took a steadying breath and hoped he was making the right decision. Dean gasped as he was thrown against the wall, a hand covering his mouth. He stared wide-eyed at his attacker. He blinked in confusion when he recognized Castiel. He nodded as Castiel's grace brushed against him, requesting silence. He had no idea what was going on. He watched in fascination as Castiel pulled out the demon knife and sliced into his arm. He moved out of the way as Castiel began to draw a spell onto the wall. It finally clicked. Castiel was helping him. And why the hell hadn't he thought to use the banishment spell? Brace yourself, Castiel warned. Dean looked up as Zachariah appeared, wings spread out aggressively. Castiel, do you mind explaining just what the hell you're doing? Zachariah advanced on them and brought his arms up as Castiel slammed his hand against the freshly painted sigil. Dean fought against the spell. It was a little easier than the last time, but he still ended up collapsing against Castiel when it had passed. He wiped at the blood dripping from his nose and stared up at Castiel, dazed. Cause, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He asked. Castiel helped Dean to stand upright and looked away. I'm sorry, Dean, he muttered. I can't keep my promise. Promise? Castiel looked back up at Dean. To not fall, he replied. This may be heaven's plan, but it's not right. He shook his head as he turned away. I'm sorry. Dean rested a hand on Castiel's shoulder and gave him a reassuring squeeze. Hey, it's okay. I mean, Falinja, it's not so bad, he lied. Castiel glanced at Dean and forced a smile. I'm sure it will be bearable with you near me. Dean took a deep breath. Okay, so where's Sam? I don't know. Dean stared at Castiel. Seriously? You're tapped into heaven. You should know. Castiel shrugged his shoulders helplessly. I'm sorry, he said. But his location is hidden from me. Dean rubbed his eyes in frustration and began pacing. Shit, wait. He turned to Castiel. Chuck. The prophet. Hell know where Sam is. Castiel looked at Dean uncertainly. Dean, if you go now it will be seen as a threat to the prophet, Castiel explained. We are on the verge of the apocalypse. Heaven will want everything to go according to plan and whoever got stuck on prophet duty will come after me. I can handle them, Dean said. It's Raphael. Raphael got prophet duty? Dean said with a laugh. What'd he piss off? It is an honor. Dean rolled his eyes. Okay. So we pop in and pop right back out. No big deal. Pastille felt doubtful about Dean's plan, but followed him nonetheless. Dean pulled the phone from Chuck's hand. I'll call you back, he said and hung up the phone. He wrapped an arm around Chuck. Hey Chuck, I was under the impression that I told you to call me if something came up. Where's Sam? You're not supposed to be here. Chuck looked from Dean to Castile. You can't be here. Yeah, I have this bad habit of doing things I'm not supposed to, Dean replied. He could feel a powerful angel quickly approaching. Now where is he? You have to leave. Chuck argued. Dean Castile looked in the direction Raphael was swiftly approaching from. I know. Dean forced Chuck to face him and gave him a little shake. Please. Where is he? I have to stop this. You're the prophet, you should know it won't go down as planned. Chuck stared up at Dean and wordlessly pointed to his messy desk. I already wrote it down, he said. You can't change it. Watch me, Dean growled as he tore through the papers until he found what he was looking for. A convent figures. He grabbed Castile by the arm. Come on. Castile shook his head. It's too late, he said. Go. It'll distract him. Dean stared at Castile in shock. What? Cash'll kill you. Castile nodded and looked away. I know. Dean reached out for Castile's grace. Instead of fear he found a serene calm. He pulled Castile into a tight hug and kissed him, flooding him with his grace. Castile gasped for breath when Dean pulled back, feeling woozy from the tainted energies Dean radiated. Go. He shouted, pushing Dean away. If you get the chance, run. Fly as far and as fast as you can, Dean said before disappearing. Castile nodded and turned to stare out the window, waiting for Raphael's arrival. He looked down at Chuck as a hand rested on his shoulder. I'm sure it'll all work out, Chuck said quietly. Castile looked back to the window. As long as Dean makes it. That's all that matters, he confided. The light from outside grew brighter. So you like him? Castile nodded. Enough to fall and die, he replied. To me he is worth it. He closed his eyes and prepared himself. Dean appeared outside the old convent. He could only feel two demons inside the building, and he had a pretty good guess as to which two they were. He entered the building and carefully made his way to the small chapel within. He could already feel Lucifer's grace poking through. He didn't bother hiding his wings, ready to grab Sam and fly at a moment's notice. He turned down a corridor and found what he was looking for. He ran towards the open door. Sam. Sam turned in time to see Dean frowning as his eyes drifted over Dean's shoulders just before the doors slammed shut. Dean pounded against the doors. He could feel Lilith's power keeping him from getting past. He shouted and screamed in frustration. He was too late. He pressed his forehead against the door, feeling Lilith's power fade, quickly replaced by Lucifer's. He backed away from the door, staring. He tentatively reached out with his grace, lightly touching Lucifer's. He felt a jolt of happiness come from Lucifer. The doors opened and Dean rushed in, finding Ruby gloating. And guess who's coming to dinner? Ruby laughed. Me? Ruby spun around and screamed as Dean punched her in the stomach. She stared in shock as she felt her life slowly drain away. But Lucifer. Dean pulled his hand back and looked to the hole forming in the ground. Sam stared at Dean. Dean. He saw the look of longing on Dean's face. Dean. He shouted as he grabbed his brother and shook him hard. Dean looked up at Sam, lost and alone. Lucifer was reaching out to him, making such wonderful promises of how they would never be apart. Sam. We have to go. Sam pulled on Dean's arm. Please, Dean. He doesn't care about you. Don't you think he would have said something? Made some effort to contact you before now? Dean clenched his eyes shut and took a shuddering breath before nodding. Sam had a point. He shut out Lucifer and felt Lucifer's anger rise. He feared Lucifer was about to lash out, so he grabbed Sam and hoped he'd be able to get them far enough away. As Dean took off, he saw a warm guiding light. He didn't know which way to go, and it didn't feel like Lucifer, so he followed it, landing safely on a passing plane. Sam looked around in surprise. He jumped when Dean grabbed his arm and squeezed hard. Dean. Are you alright? He asked quietly. Dean violently shook his head. Between Lucifer calling out to him and being stuck on a plane, he was not alright. He had tried repeatedly to leave the plane, but something was keeping him there. He didn't think it was Lucifer. He wondered if it was God. But God was uninvolved, right? Ended. Moved to the second episode.